Conservation and Management of Russian Forests by Jennifer Malkus, Kara Davis, and Chris Sickle.
While many people believe that Russia is mainly considered a winter wasteland, it is a hub of biodiversity with over 22% of the world's forests. However, these forests are currently under the same risk of deforestation and mismanagement as most other forests of the world. Russia's concern for forest conservation is to use it as a political tool to gain power, which rarely implementing the promises for safeguarding the environment. Problems such as corruption, fire, and illegal logging further impede their ability to manage forests sustainably. Forest products and the unique biodiversity throughout Russia are in danger from clear-cutting mismanagement of the forest. If Russia enforced stricter forest codes, this would help stabilize Russia's forestry practices and allow them to better conserve their forest resources. Russia needs to consider spending more resources on conserving their forests if they wish to have a forest in the future.
The boreal forest of Russia is approximately 70% conifers, 17% softwoods, and 13% hardwoods, spreading over 1.87 billion acres of total forested land. Within these forests lies one of the greatest biodiversity sinks of the Northern Hemisphere. Over 11,000 species of vascular plants, 320 mammals, 730 birds, and 270 freshwater fish reside there. 538 of these species are endangered. Russia has the world's largest population of brown bears and about 10% of the world's tiger population. Within the borders, 40% of forests are considered inaccessible and many are virgin forests untouched by human encroachment. This is incredibly rare in today's expanding society. Old growth trees and undisturbed ecosystems make the majority of the interior of the forest, standing as the last of only a few acres totally unknown to modern science. Throughout the forest floor there lies 41 billion tons of carbon sequestered in vegetation and 120 billion tons in the topsoil, which is removed from the atmosphere, counteracting a percentage of the carbon released as Russia burns fuel. However, with 94% of the forest under the jurisdiction of the Russian Federal Forest Service's weak regulation, those numbers will be subject to change in the future. The sheer size and quality of the Russian boreal forest allows for a unique, irreplaceable environment which, if destroyed, would never return and have drastic effects on the global climate.
In the beginning, Russian forests were widely unmanaged, and most forests were owned by royalty. These owners had sole control over the use of forests and determined who was allowed to harvest and who was not. The first forest department of Russia was formed in 1798. The department's main goal was to increase the number of policies governing Russian forests in order to maintain absolute government control over the forest. Despite these policies, widespread deforestation and corruption continued to plague Russia. In hopes of slowing down the destruction of the forest, the Charter of Forests was put into place in 1802. This was the first act that mentioned the relationship between harvesting and reforesting. In the Imperial Order of 1855, the forest policies were put into place to serve Russia's public concern for conservation of the forests. This marked the first compromise by the government to put in real conservation laws due to the public outcry for halting the deforestation. Next, the Revolution of 1917 disbanded private ownership of the forest throughout Russia. This allowed the government to decide how to use the forest in order to meet the needs of the people. Until recently, the Russian government gave little notice to conservation of the forest regardless of the effect on the ecosystem, climate, or forest products. Simply put, they have so much forest and they were making profits that there was little reason to worry. In 2006, the Forest Code was initiated to change all that. This doctrine changed the hierarchical system into a single nationwide stance on forest management, protection, resources, and the renewal of forests. Russian government has now the new powers for protection of the forest, enforcement of forestry law throughout the country.
Much of the Russian forest is managed for timber use. The Russian government puts out an annual allowable cut figure every year to companies requesting logging rights in the country. At the end of the year, the Russian government calculates how much wood was harvested legally and how much they suspect was harvested illegally. And this makes the following annual allowable cut based on these figures and interest from companies in harvesting. The major timber product exported from Russia is unprocessed or low-processed timber. Unprocessed timber is in the form of raw logs, and low-processed timber is in the form of roundwood. Most of this exported timber is sent to Western Europe and Asia, specifically China, and most will be used in building and construction. Many major non-wood forest products that are produced include berries, mushrooms, nuts, herbal teas, medicinal plants, and decorative wreaths. Most of these non-wood forest products are not exported and are instead sold at local markets.
As of right now, the new owners of the Russian forest enterprises are largely managers from the old era, privatizing the industry into their own hands and maximizing personal wealth, contributing to the corruption which rages through the system. The transition to the market economy since the fall of the Soviet society has also forced the forest enterprises to be more efficient, but with no subsidies, firms are forced to downsize their efforts. Political parties claim that they will contribute government power and resources to encourage conservation to gain popular vote. However, since there's little incentive to truly implement the new regulations and enforcement, little is achieved. These and many other issues with the current forest code have hindered conservation efforts greatly. Today, as of little 2% of the Russian forests are strictly protected. However, there are small steps that can be taken to a better, more sustainable future in the forests. 260,000 square kilometers of Russian forests have been certified by the FSC since the Forestry Code has been enacted. And as of April this year, Russia has announced a new national park which covers 60% of the Amur leopard's remaining habitat. Annual growth of the forest is nearly 100 million cubic meters. However, with all this at stake, more can be done to protect the unique ecosystem of Russia from the dangers of overharvesting, greedy management companies, and placid government.
Another major issue plaguing Russian forests is the forest fires that happen just about every year. Over the past decade, fires have been intensifying and little is being done to stop these fires. In 2010 alone, forest fires affected close to 2 billion hectares of forest in Russia. While fire can contribute to renewing the forest, the fires in Russia are usually much worse than what is safe for the forest. Many of these fires are products of human actions and can be easily prevented. Educating people on fire safety and enforcing stricter penalties on those who start fires would be a good step towards stopping them from happening. Illegal harvesting of timber and other forest products from the forest is another serious issue. The government does not have enough resources to be able to combat this issue. Illegal harvesting is a major contributor to the degradation and destruction of Russian forests as a whole. It is estimated that 20 to 30% of the logging that is done in Russia is illegal. This does not include local illegal harvesting done by people going into the forest to meet their everyday needs. The government needs to do a better job at keeping criminal loggers out of the forest. They also need to have a system in place to provide for those who use the forest for their basic needs so that they can continue to meet their needs without further destroying the forest.
With the implementation of the new Forest Code in 2006, some improvements have been made. This document allowed for the privatization of some forests, taking some pressure of enforcement off the hands of the government and into the hands of the people. FSC certification of forests being harvested has also improved conservation. FSC certification allows for closer inspection of the way forests are harvested, and this better protects the forest without the government needing to add regulations. The government has also made new national parks and protected areas to preserve animal and plant species throughout Russia. While these new areas under protection are a good step towards increased conservation, the government still needs to budget more money and manpower to the protection of these areas. By far, the best way to improve conservation will be increased education of the people. Educating the people on the importance of conservation could be the solution to many of Russia's current problems. With education, people will better understand how overharvesting and degrading the forest will be detrimental to the country as a whole. This education could come from many sources, including the forestry sector and outside conservation organizations.
The largest and most important part of future conservation is the enforcement of current and possibly new laws aimed to protect Russian forests. This will be accomplished by increasing stricter policies on the forest and by giving more money to protect the forestry sector. Outside organizations will hopefully be major contributors to the money side of protection by donating to conserve Russian forests. With this money, the Russian government should strengthen their incentive programs so that people have motivation to protect the forests. One aspect of Russia that was not focused on in the Forest Code was the right of the indigenous people to use Russia's forests. They were not guaranteed the right to live on the reserved portion of Russian Federation. There needs to be a new law in place to recruit these people to the discussion of Russian forest conservation by offering sections of the forest in concession to their indigenous tribes. Indigenous people will be very important in keeping the Russian forest healthy and diverse due to their knowledge of the forest and simple protection methods. The last step to protecting the forest would be to control invasive species from coming in and keeping them away from the forest in order to maintain the natural biodiversity. Keeping track of organisms is brought into the country as to maintain the natural biodiversity. Keeping track of organisms is brought into the country as to stop the importation of invasive plants, animals, and especially insects is vital to holding on to the current wildlife and environmental status. Russia has a long road ahead of them to be able to conserve the forest for future generations.
Mismanagement of forests will always be a serious issue in the conservation of forests in Russia. Stricter regulations on forestry companies and the ability to enforce stronger forest code protocols would allow for more sustainable forest management and the protection of those forests which house many endangered ecosystems. More incentives to political dignitaries to support sustainability may only come with more control over regional government and the immediate profits. However, while Russia government assists with the corruption it does, any change, including that for a more sustainable system, will be a challenge. Globally used forest products and timber will not be as abundant as many businesses believe, and once gone, decades of recovery are necessary for any type of harvesting to resume. The wall between short-term profits and long-term continuous forest use needs to be torn down, allowing the people of Russia to see the inevitable consequences of their current management practices.